I'm Elisa Parker. We're back here actually streaming live at the Wild and Scenic Film Festival Media Lounge based at KVMR. We're getting ready. We're kind of like wrapping things up. It's been a really full weekend of fun and we were just talking about the connections when you're here in person that you make because there are extraordinary people hanging out in this little town. I mean, whether they represent a corporation that's trying to do, social change, or a filmmaker that's captured an amazing story about their adventure going down the Green River, or even looking at some of the most important environmental action issues of our time, really. One of those is fracking, which has been a really hot topic the last couple of years, especially here at Wild and Scenic. David Braun and Jessica Wohlander are with me today. Their film's called Faith Against Fracking. David was involved as well with Gasland 1 and Gasland 2. And, fracking was probably like a couple of years ago something we didn't hear very much about, right? But can you tell everyone too, just real quick, about fracking? And then we're going to get into the direction you took with your film. That's a little different than just going after the environmentalists.
Sure. So fracking is a process of oil and gas extraction. The reason that it happens is because conventional reserves, which used to be taken out of the ground, conventional reserves being a pocket of oil or a pocket of gas, you would basically just drill down into that pocket of oil and gas and use a straw to essentially suck out that oil and gas. All of those reserves are gone. There are no kind of easy to reach oil and gas reserves still here in the United States. But what they have found is tightly packed rock shale formations with, if you can imagine, oil and gas basically in kind of champagne bubbles throughout these tightly packed rock formations. And so the way in which they want to get this, or the way in which they go about getting this oil and gas out, is a little Neanderthal. They're essentially using water, sand, and chemicals as the club to basically smash it out of these rock formations. And literally that's what they do. They drill about a mile down, and then they'll drill about a mile to 2 miles horizontally through these rock formations. They will set off explosions down there, as they call them, perforations. And then they take water, and anywhere from about 1 to 8 million gallons of water. They mix it from, on average, with about 220 to 660,000 pounds of toxic chemicals. Of those chemicals, we know that about 32% cause cancer, 43% are genetic disruptors, and 58% are immune suppressants. They mix the water with those chemicals and sand. They put that into the ground at extremely high pressure, about anywhere from 10 to 15,000 pounds of pressure per square inch. It takes about 160 pounds of pressure per square inch to break the strongest bone in my body, which is my femur. So they're putting this water and chemical cocktail mixture into the earth at 100 times the amount of pressure it takes to break the strongest bone in my body. And then they will fracture that rock, and then will bring the oil or the water, and the oil and the water and the gas back up to the surface, and then separate it out. Of course, not only are the chemicals going in and coming back up, but down in those layers of earth, there is also all sorts of heavy metals, arsenic, radiation, benzene, a whole host of other things that we don't want to come up. And the really key thing about this is that they're injecting this chemical mixture into what they know are imperfect containers, meaning that the industry itself tells us that 5% of the well casings, which is the protective layer that keeps our aquifers, our groundwater aquifers safe, they fail at a rate of 5% in the first year and 50% over the course of 30 years. Now, if we had 1 in 20 airplanes falling out of the sky, we wouldn't have air travel. We wouldn't have airports, right? But somehow this industry is able to continue with this completely imperfect record with these hundreds of thousands of pounds of chemicals.
It's really just, it's mind-boggling.
It is
really,
mind-boggling.
David and Jessica. And I have to say, also since, when we had David with us recently at Wild and Scenic, you and along with so many others created a movement too in New York. So you banned fracking, got fracking banned in New York, and that's huge. And now we have our eyes on California.
We sure do.
I had talked to John Bowermaster yesterday, dear Governor Braun, who might possibly be open if he had the support, right, to having fracking banned. I mean, it's like the whole idea. What would we? It's like keeping it underground.
Keeping it underground.
That's what we want to tell
yeah.
people, right?
Yeah, for sure. There's no
to
reason
tell Governor Braun.
Well, that's what we want to tell. And Governor Brown's doing a lot of great things in terms of his renewable energy policy, and we know that we can power our lives through renewables. We have scientists from Stanford University and other credible universities that have plans on how to get us off of fossil fuels and onto renewable energy, and to do it in a very short time frame. The technology is there. All we're lacking is the political will. So Jerry Brown is really good with that stuff. But the tough thing is that to stop something like fracking in the state of California, you have to stand up to one of the most powerful industries in the state of California, which is the oil industry. And so we need to really show him some support and show him some love to say, hey, you can do this. And I think it's, he's been resistant to doing it, and who can blame him? Who wants to start a fight with the strongest industry in the state of California? But we have to remember historically that somebody like Abraham Lincoln did not want to abolish slavery. And imagine if Abraham Lincoln had been like, well, what if we walk a middle line? What if we regulate slavery a little bit? What if we stop breaking up the families of the slaves so much? And, and they could have done that, right? But instead he said, no, we're going to abolish it. And because of this, we're still talking about Abraham Lincoln today, right?
Yeah.
Same thing with a guy like LBJ. LBJ did not want to do civil rights, but Dr. King and others pushed him to do it. And because of that, we got the Civil Rights Bill. We got so much else happened as a result of that.
So we need to give that support to Jerry Brown.
We do,
Yeah.
and I think it's important not to villainize the guy. The guy's done a lot. Jerry Brown's done a lot over his career. I think now we just need to tactfully push him and respectfully push him, but not let up.
Yeah.
I mean, he's the guy that can do this. And let's remember that we can remember Jerry Brown for 5 years, or we can remember him for 150
Forever.
years, right? We'll
Forever.
keep talking. We're still talking about Abraham Lincoln, and people from 150 years from now, if Jerry Brown turns away the oil industry far and above one of the worst climate wreckers and polluters with their industry and with their business practices, if he stops them in his home state, he will be remembered and he will be a historical figure. And we want him to be that. We want him to be that successful historical figure. Yeah.
So the film that you came here to Wild and Scenic with is Faith Against Fracking.
Yeah.
And I love this too. And Jessica, you're the producer of this, and thanks for being here as well, Jessica. Faith Against Fracking, what I love about this is you're taking a unique approach about how something like fracking that affects us all, it's not always necessarily even, I don't want to say environmental activists, but we, in labeling people, that's what happens, the environmental activists. But now you've taken a new approach. Jessica, do you want to talk about that a little bit, and how even with the Pope, when he came here and talked about climate change, for example, how this started to spawn the whole movie?
Yeah, sure. So those campaigns that David was just talking about, the abolitionist movement and the civil rights movement, those both had huge support from faith communities, and it's questionable about whether those campaigns would have been as successful as they were without the faith communities coming in to be a part of that. So faith communities can play a really key role in any movement, and I think the fracking movement and the extreme extraction movement is exactly the same. And you have these kind of already organized communities where they're not necessarily, they're talking about stewarding the planet and creation care, but they're not necessarily talking about it in this way. So the inspiration for this film is to be able to get into these communities and start having these conversations and really engage these communities in the movement. And then when the Pope came out with his encyclical on climate change, that was just such a boom, it was such an amazing thing to happen for the faith community. And so we really wanted to take advantage of that moment and build on it as much as we could.
That's fantastic. And what has been one of the surprises then you discovered in making this film about faith communities around the world, or at least even here in the nation, and their feelings and thoughts around something like fracking?
Well, I think one of the big things that has been an eye-opener is that faith leaders have an ability to say things that are so kind of radical and truthful, and nobody bats an eye. we have a faith leader who essentially quotes the Pope in our film by saying that our common home is being pillaged, and cowardice in defending our common home is a sin. Now, that's something that I could never say to people, but as we get to a point where people have realized that fracking is a bad thing. When we first started fighting this, we had our poll numbers nationally were like 30% of the people nationally.
People just didn't even know what it was.
They didn't know what it was. And so they thought it was okay, whatever it was. But now we're clearly like in a majority. We have 55% of the people in the United States do not want to see increased fracking. That's enough to get us elected as president, you know? And so now that we've come to that point, what we really need people to do is to step up and to take action. For them to say something's bad, and then actually do something that's consistent with what they're saying, right? And so that's the imperative, that this moral call is that we, the powerful thing about working with communities of faith is that they have the ability to stand on that moral high ground to say, you know, we have this moral responsibility to protect creation, and not only creation, our neighbors who are getting sickened by these dangerous practices, our waters, which are a sacrament, right? Our air that we breathe, all of these things, earthquakes, all of
now,
these
like
things.
you were saying off camera, but in Oklahoma, I didn't know Oklahoma has earthquakes. When I heard that, I was like, what the heck?
And it was a state that never had earthquakes before fracking. And now the USGS has connected earthquakes to fracking in Oklahoma, to injection wells in the state of Colorado, directly to fracking in Ohio. In Texas, we're seeing earthquakes. In Arkansas, we're seeing earthquakes. Just earthquakes alone. When you have one industry that can ruin every other industry, why on earth would you allow that one industry, no matter how politically connected they are, to continue?
Sure.
No one else's livelihood is more important than anyone else's, and especially everyone else's.
Yeah.
And that's what's really tragic.
So telling our viewers, what would you want, maybe from each of you, what is one thing that you each want them to do as a result of this, and what we can do to help stop fracking, especially here in California and of course nationwide, but I know we're also encouraging and supporting Jerry Braun to make this decision to stop it.
I would say the most important thing is to be engaged in whatever way that means for you. So call Governor Braun, write him a letter, send him an email, come out to an action, plan an action in your own community. I think it's really all of our responsibility to give Governor Braun the support he needs to make this happen. So I would say do whatever it is you can, whatever is in your capacity to make this shift happen.
Great, thanks, Jessica.
Yeah, and I would agree with that same sentiment. I think that if you say that something is not good, then do something to prove that those words are true. Otherwise, you can say something all you like, but unless you're doing something that is consistent with what you say, if you say fracking's bad, but you don't do anything, then you can't evidence that you actually feel that way. But if you say fracking is bad and you call the governor, or you get involved in a local grassroots group, or you talk to your legislator, you set up a meeting with your legislator, either here in the state of California or in another place nationally, and you follow through with that, then you can say, you know what? I said that this was bad, and I followed through with it, and I did something, and I'm a part of this movement, this global movement that is going to protect the world for future generations. And you know how I know that? Because I did it, and I'm doing it. And there are a lot of other people doing it, and you can be a part of that, as Paul Hawkins says, that blessed unrest. That rising up of people taking action in conviction with their words to realize their dream where we're not polluting our waters and poisoning our children so that we can turn on our lights or feed ourselves. And that's where we're all headed. And by taking part of that, you become a part of this global community of change. And it's profound because we're realizing the dream. And you'll be remembered in history as being a part of this thing that came and changed the course of history. So just do something. Back up your words, whether it's incremental and small or it's something that's huge and dramatic. Just do something.
All right. Wow. David Braun, he's a movement maker. David Braun is. Yeah. And Jessica, I also wanted to ask you real quick too, what is your own personal interest in this and motivation to be a part and to produce this film?
Yeah, I guess I got into this movement through food justice, actually. I was in grad school and started working with farmers out in New York, and this is what they were worried about. This is what they were all talking about. So I started organizing with them. And I was out in New York, and everyone told me to go find David Braun when I was coming back to California.
You could hear him probably before you even saw him.
Yeah, it echoed across the country.
Totally, you're like, that's David.
So I went and sought him out, and I've been honored to kind of jump onto this campaign and be working with him.
That's fantastic. You guys are awesome, and thank you so much for coming back to Wild and Scenic, and thanks for being a part of this. Faith Against Fracking's the film. Got to go see it. Is it screening again today?
We just actually screened it this morning
nice.
as a part of the Sacred Sundays.
Oh,
but it's an
perfect.
honor to be here, and it's an honor to be a part of this community. This community has so much integrity, down to the sponsors, the corporations that are behind this have integrity, the people that run this, the films have integrity. This is, I mean, if people that are watching this, if you've never been to Wild and Scenic, you have to check this out. There is nothing like this in the world. This is such an amazing experience with so many amazing people who have such big hearts. Please come check this out. Help to make Wild and Scenic a success. And host a Wild and Scenic Film Festival in your community. They take the films on tour. You can bring these messages into your community, share this, and help to get people activated there. This is a magical experience. Be a part of it. Be a part of this movement.
Great. Thanks,
Yeah.
David.
Awesome.
WildandScenicFilmFestival.org. It's all about inspiring change and activism. We'll be right
That's
back.
right.
Thanks, David and
Awesome.
Jessica.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Blessed is the transformative power of the universe for creating this incredible universe and blessing us with the possibility of human life and all of the joys that come from living on this planet, and recognize the beauty of this world and do everything we can to preserve and protect it. Amen.
Dear Governor Braun, compelled by conscience and by our moral obligation to our communities of faith, to the health and safety of all Californians, to the well-being of future generations, and to our living ecosystems on which all present and future economic vitality depends, we, the undersigned interfaith leaders, request your immediate intervention to halt the toxic practice of hydrofracking and the other industrial practices associated with unconventional oil extraction in California.
The planet is a gift to us, and preserving it is a sacred issue because we're the stewards of what we have, our resources. And if we don't preserve it, our children, their children, won't have the same beauty around them that we have.
Stewardship, I believe, is our first calling when it comes to Western Christian thought. And the biblical record, God calls us to first be stewards, caretakers of the earth.
We have a special obligation to protect and care for this world. And at this moment, for the first time in human history, human power has gotten to the point where we can actually destroy the life support system of this planet. And we seem to be moving there in a very accelerated way.